The man hadn't even looked at the menu before he decided she was beneath him. Hazel eyes, sharp jaw, suit jacket that probably cost more than Petra Novak's entire month of rent. Petra noticed all of it in the 3 seconds it took her to walk to table 9 with her notepad. She also noticed the way he leaned back in his chair like the restaurant belonged to him, which, given who he was, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Callum Sterling, 34 years old, youngest partner at Sterling Meridian Capital, the private equity firm his father had built from nothing and turned into something that swallowed smaller companies the way a whale swallows water, casually, without much thought for what gets filtered out. His picture had been in Forbes twice. She knew because her co-worker had shown her the article on her phone 3 weeks ago, right after the firm had quietly acquired a 40% stake in the hospital system that employed Petra's mother. That was the thing about working at Glenwood Grill. You learned to recognize the people who held power over your life before they ever learned your name. "I'll need a few minutes," he said without looking up. He was reading something on his phone, thumb scrolling slowly. "Of course," Petra said. She set a water glass down beside him. He glanced at the water the way someone might glance at a parking ticket, registered, mildly irritated, already moving on. "I didn't ask for still, it's complimentary. I'm aware of what complimentary means." He looked up then, and the look wasn't cruel exactly. It was something worse, indifferent. "Take it back." Petra picked up the glass. She didn't say anything. That was the first rule her mother had taught her. Not about restaurants, but about life in general. When someone's trying to bait you into a reaction, the worst thing you can do is give them the satisfaction. She brought back sparkling water, set it down. He didn't acknowledge it. "The halibut," he said, still looking at his phone. "However the chef's preparing it tonight, don't. Have him do it with the lemon butter, not whatever's on the menu. And medium, not whatever they consider medium here." Petra wrote it down. "Anything else? That'll be enough to start." He finally set the phone face down on the table and looked at her properly for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but a kind of recalibration. Like he was adjusting a setting. "You're new. I've been here 8 months. I come here every other Tuesday." "I know," Petra said. "You usually sit at table 4, closer to the window." That seemed to surprise him slightly. "Then why am I at 9? "Because table 4 is reserved for a party of 6 tonight, and the hostess moved you. You didn't seem to notice." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without any particular warmth, he said, "Lemon butter. Medium," Petra said, and walked away. She didn't let herself exhale until she was through the kitchen door. Her co-worker Bryn was waiting on the other side with an expression that suggested she'd been watching through the porthole window. "Table 9, Bryn said. "You know who that is, right?" "Sterling Meridian Capital," Petra said. "He made the waiter at Coletti's cry last spring. Good thing I'm not a waiter at Coletti's." Bryn looked at her like she was something between impressive and unhinged. "He tips 20% exactly. Not $1 more, not $1 less. 20%, like it's a math problem he solved once and doesn't need to revisit." "I'll survive," Petra said. She said it with more confidence than she felt. The halibut came out wrong. Not her fault, she'd relayed the order exactly. But the line cook had been dealing with a rush, and he'd sent it out with the herb crust the menu specified, not the lemon butter Sterling had requested. Petra caught it before she'd taken 3 steps from the pass. She turned around, sent it back, waited 4 minutes while the kitchen scrambled, and brought out the corrected plate 6 minutes later than she should have. Sterling looked at the watch on his wrist. Not pointedly, or at least not theatrically, just a glance. The kind of glance that communicated everything. "There was a delay with the kitchen," Petra said. "I apologize." He cut into the fish, tasted it, set down the fork. "This is the herb at the plate." The kitchen had fixed the preparation method but apparently forgotten to. "I'll have them redo it." "Don't, Mr. Sterling," I said, "don't." He pushed the plate slightly to the side. "Bring me the check." The dinner had been 11 minutes. He'd eaten 2 bites. Petra brought the check. He signed it without looking at the total, left exactly 20%. She checked and stood up, buttoning his jacket. "The halibut was wrong," he said, not unkindly, just flatly. "It was. The kitchen made an error and I should have caught it at the pass. I'm sorry." He seemed to consider this. "Then, you caught it at the pass? Yes. You sent it back? Yes. And then the kitchen sent out the wrong preparation anyway? That's correct." Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile. It was more like the ghost of one. The idea of a smile. Briefly considered, and then set aside. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," he said, "table 4. And then he was gone. Bryn appeared at Petra's elbow. "What just happened?" "I genuinely don't know," Petra said. She'd taken the job at Glenwood Grill because the tips were good and her mother needed her. That wasn't a complaint. Petra wasn't someone who spent much time on complaints. There wasn't room for them. practically speaking. Her mother, Lena, had worked as a surgical coordinator at Vance Memorial Hospital for 19 years. Good salary, good benefits, a pension she'd been counting on since the day she started. And then Sterling Meridian Capital had quietly, efficiently acquired a controlling interest in the hospital's parent company, and the restructuring had begun. Departments merged. Staff reduced. The pension plan, 19 years of her mother's planning, was currently under review by the firm's financial restructuring team, which was a phrase that Petra had come to understand meant we haven't decided yet how much of what you were promised we're going to keep. Her mother was 58 years old. She had a heart condition that required medication that cost $400 a month even with insurance. She had a small house with a small mortgage that she'd been making extra payments on because she'd always believed in getting out from under debt early. She had a daughter who waited tables because she'd dropped out of her second year of nursing school when the finances stopped making sense and hadn't figured out how to get back in yet. Petra didn't hate Callum Sterling. Hate required a kind of personal investment she couldn't afford, but she was aware of him the way you're aware of weather, as a force that shaped conditions, that could ruin things, that operated entirely according to its own logic and felt nothing either way. 2 weeks later, she was assigned to table 4. He came in at 7:15, same as always, and sat down and looked up at her with the expression of someone who had just confirmed a hypothesis. "The halibut tonight?" he asked. "Lemon butter. I already confirmed with the kitchen." He made a small sound that might have been approval or might have been nothing. He ordered the halibut, a glass of Sancerre, and a side of the roasted fingerlings. The order came out correctly. He ate it in silence, looking out the window at the street below. When he was finished, Petra cleared the plate. "You're not from Chicago originally," he said. Petra paused. "Minneapolis. What brought you here?" It was the most personal question anyone at these tables had asked her in 8 months, and it came from the least expected person. She considered several versions of the answer. She gave him the simplest one. "My mother lives here." He nodded, like that was sufficient. He signed the check, 20% exact, and left. This, apparently, was how they operated for the next month. He came in every other Tuesday. She was assigned his table. The halibut was always correct. He asked her one question per visit, something small and factual, and she answered it honestly and briefly. He did not smile. He did not make small talk. He tipped exactly 20%. Then, on a Tuesday in March, he came in and he didn't sit down. He stood at table 4 and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not indifference, not calculation. Something closer to discomfort. "I'd like to speak with you," he said. "Not here, if you're willing." Petra looked at him. "About what?" "Vance Memorial." The room didn't shift exactly, but something in Petra did. "I get off at 10, she said. He was waiting outside in a car she recognized as expensive, without being able to name the make. He got out when she pushed through the front door, which she hadn't expected. He didn't seem like someone who got out of cars for people. "There's a coffee place 2 blocks down," she said. "I'd rather not get in the car." He stopped. Looked at her. "That's fair," he said, and it was the first time she'd heard him say something without any edge in it at all. They walked. The coffee place was one of those small overlit spots that stayed open late for the late shift hospital crowd. She ordered a dark roast. He ordered nothing, which she found faintly amusing. She couldn't decide if it was because he didn't want anything, or because the coffee didn't meet some specification she hadn't been informed of. "You know what Sterling Meridian is doing to Vance Memorial," he said. "Not a question. I know what it's doing to my mother." He didn't flinch. She'd half expected him to. The restructuring team filed their recommendation last week. Your mother's division, surgical coordination, is being flagged for consolidation. Petra kept her hands around her coffee cup. "What does that mean?" "It means 12 positions will be eliminated. Hers is one of them." The coffee shop hummed around them. Someone behind the counter was steaming milk. Outside, a taxi went by. "Why are you telling me this?" Petra asked. "Because I've been trying to decide for 3 weeks whether I should, and I've run out of reasons not to." She looked at him, directly then. This close, in the flat fluorescent light of a place that had no interest in flattering anyone, he looked different than he did at table 4. Less armored, somehow. There was something in the way he was sitting, careful, like he was being precise about occupying space, that suggested this conversation cost him something. "You're one of the partners," she said. "Junior partner, youngest. My vote on restructuring decisions carries weight but not majority. But you have a vote." "Yes. And you voted for the consolidation." He didn't look away. "I voted for a modified version that would have reduced the cuts by half. I was outvoted." Petra sat with that for a moment. "So you came to tell me something you can't change. I came to tell you something you can use." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table between them. There are 6 positions in the consolidated department. They're allocated by seniority and certification level. Your mother has 19 years of experience, and her surgical coordination certification is current through next year. She's in the top 3 by every metric they're using. But the HR director overseeing allocations has a pattern of making decisions that don't track with the metrics. Petra looked at the paper but didn't pick it up yet. You're saying it's rigged. I'm saying it's subjective in ways that aren't supposed to be subjective. That's the same thing. He almost smiled. Almost. Yes, so what do I do with this? The allocation decision hasn't been finalized. There's a 30-day review period. If your mother submits a formal credential review request and specifically cites the metric criteria in the restructuring documentation. He tapped the folded paper, which is in there, along with the HR compliance contact at the parent company who operates independently of the local HR director. You're telling me how to go around him. I'm telling you the process exists. Whether she uses it is her choice. Petra picked up the paper, unfolded it, looked at the numbers, the names, the clean, careful way he'd laid it out. You printed this. I didn't want to email it because it could be traced, because I prefer not to create records of conversations I'm not supposed to be having. She looked at him. He looked back. The milk steamer had gone quiet. Outside it had started to drizzle. Why are you doing this? She said. And I want the real answer, not the answer you've been workshopping. A pause. Long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Then, because I sat at that table for a month, and the only person in that building who treated me like I might occasionally be wrong was you. And I'm not used to that, and it turns out I found it useful. He looked out the window, and because the consolidation is going to hurt people who didn't do anything to deserve it, and I'm in a position to make one of those people less hurt, and not doing it would make me someone I've been trying not to be. Petra folded the paper back up, put it in her jacket pocket. The sparkling water, she said. The first night. What about it? You sent back the still water. I prefer sparkling. You could have just said sparkling when you sat down. He looked at the table. I know. That's what I thought, she said. She picked up her coffee. Thank you for this. I mean that. I know you do, he said. And for the first time since she'd met him, the words didn't sound like a judgment. They sounded like he was simply paying attention. Her mother called it a miracle. Petra called it paperwork. Lena Novak submitted the formal credential review on a Thursday afternoon, citing Section 4.2 BAB of the Restructuring Compliance Framework and seeing the parent company HR compliance officer, whose name was on the folded piece of paper Petra had carried home in her jacket pocket. By the following Wednesday, the local HR director had been asked to resubmit his allocation recommendations with documented metric justification for each decision. By the end of the 30-day review period, Lena Novak was one of the 6 retained positions. She cried on the phone when she told Petra. Petra sat on the edge of her bed in her apartment and listened and said the right things and felt something loosen in her chest that had been clenched tight for so long she'd stopped noticing it. She didn't tell her mother about the conversation in the coffee shop. She didn't tell anyone. The following Tuesday, Callum Sterling came in at 7:15 and sat at table 4. Petra brought him sparkling water without asking. He looked at it, then at her. Something in his face that she was starting to understand was the closest he got to open, a slight easing around the eyes, a fractional softening. The halibut tonight? He asked. Kitchen confirmed. He nodded. Sit down, he said. Petra looked at him. I'm working. Take a 5-minute break. I've watched you work a double shift on a Tuesday in March without sitting down once. 5 minutes won't tank the restaurant. She thought about all the reasons to say no. She thought about the folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket, now at home, in the drawer of her nightstand. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, relieved in a way that Petra hadn't heard since before the restructuring started. She sat down. Your mother, he said. The review went through. It did. Good. Yes, Petra said. It was. He was quiet for a moment. Then I'm going to push for a broader review of the HR director's allocation process. Yours wasn't the only case. Petra looked at him. You'll get pushback from the other partners? Probably. That could get complicated for you. Most things worth doing are complicated. He picked up the wine list, looked at it without much interest. I have enough standing to make it annoying enough that they'd rather fix the process than deal with the noise. And you're willing to do that? I'm already doing it. I submitted the formal request this morning. Petra was quiet. Outside the window, the city was doing its ordinary evening things. Cabs and pedestrians, and the soft glow of other rests where other people were deciding whether to trust each other. You're not what I thought you were, she said finally. He set down the wine list. What did you think I was? Exactly what you look like, which is someone who decided a long time ago that being right was more important than being good, and made his peace with it. He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd miscalculated. Then, I made my peace with it, and then I sat at table 4 for a month and unmade it, apparently. The sparkling water, Petra said. The sparkling water, he agreed. And this time, something in his voice was different, something she couldn't quite name, except that it sounded like a person admitting they'd been carrying something down for too long and finally setting it on a table. She stood up, straightened her apron. I'll put your order in, she said. Petra. He said her name for the first time. She hadn't realized until that moment that he'd been careful not to. Careful in the way you're careful around something you're deciding how to hold. Thank you. She looked at him. For what? For not letting me get away with the water. I work for tips, she said. I can't afford to let anyone get away with anything. He laughed then, a real one, short and slightly rusty, like it hadn't been used in a while. The couple at table 6 looked over, startled by the sound coming from a man who did not look like he laughed at restaurants. Petra walked back toward the kitchen. She was smiling before she got through the door. She made sure she was through the door before she let it show. 3 things happened over the next 4 months. The first was that Sterling Meridian's HR compliance review expanded beyond Vance Memorial to 2 other hospital systems in the portfolio, and the local HR director quietly resigned in June rather than face a formal investigation. 7 additional employees whose positions had been incorrectly deprioritized were reinstated or offered equivalent roles. Petra found out about this from a notification her mother forwarded, a letter from Vance Memorial's new HR liaison thanking staff for their patience during the transition. The second was that Callum Sterling stopped coming to Glenwood Grill every other Tuesday and started coming every Tuesday. He always sat at table 4. The halibut was always lemon butter. He always tipped exactly 20%, but he'd started staying until close, which meant the check was larger, which meant 20% was no longer the insult it had once seemed. The third was that, on a Tuesday evening in late July, he asked Petra if she'd have dinner with him the following week. Not at table 4, somewhere else. You mean like a date, she said. I mean exactly like a date, he said, if you're willing. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things, looking at it from all angles, accounting for what she knew and what she didn't, being realistic about the gap between the two. He was still a partner at a private equity firm. He still made decisions that had consequences she might not always agree with. He was still the man who had sent back the still water without asking for sparkling, who had eaten 2 bites of an incorrectly prepared halibut and signed the check and left. But he was also the man who had walked 2 blocks in March to sit in an overlit coffee shop and hand her a piece of paper he'd printed, because he didn't want there to be a record, who had submitted a formal compliance request the morning after deciding it was the right thing to do without asking her for anything in return. Wednesday works, she said. Wednesday, he agreed. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, looked at her with the expression she'd come to think of as his paying attention face, focused and specific, like she was something worth seeing clearly. I'll make a reservation, he said. Make sure the water situation is settled in advance, she said. He paused at the edge of the table. I'll inform them I'll need sparkling. Good, Petra said. See how easy that was? He left. Bryn appeared from somewhere behind Petra's left shoulder. Did Callum Sterling just ask you to dinner? He did, the man who made the waiter at Coletti's cry. That was a different person, probably, Petra said. People change. Bryn looked skeptical. Do they? Petra thought about a folded piece of paper, a cup of dark roast, a laugh that sounded like it had gotten a little out of practice, a man who had voted against something, lost, and then found a different way to be right about it anyway. Sometimes, she said, if someone makes it annoying enough for them not to. She picked up the check from table 6 and went to run it, and the restaurant went on around her the way restaurants do. Loud and warm and full of people deciding, over plates and glasses and the ordinary architecture of a meal, whether to let someone else in.